Dolphins. Have you ever really met anyone that doesn't like a dolphin? Well, I don't think I ever have, and I probably wouldn't like him anyways. Seriously, what a beautiful, peaceful creature. Here's a story for you. I actually got to rescue a dolphin that got disorientated during a storm and ended up stranded on the beach. It's one of my favorite stories. Me, Mark Kyle, got so lucky to help one of these amazing mammals. It was so cool. Now, let me ask you a question. What would be your ideal job? How about this one? How about if you got to spend a lot of time on boats and then you're in the water all the time studying dolphins? There's also another question for you. Do you know how dolphins communicate with each other? I had the pleasure, and I mean the pleasure, to talk with Dr. Kathleen Dudzinski. She's the founder and executive director of the Dolphin Communication Project. And guess what? She's got that job. And again, she was such a pleasure to talk to. Did you know that these complex social animals' closest land mammal is a hippopotamus? Did you know that their skeletal structure of their pectoral fins is arranged very similar to our hands, the human hands? Have you heard the term echolocation? It's believed that dolphins use something similar to sonic sound that could possibly give the dolphin a 3D image of what's in front of them. Also, dolphins, they don't even have a sense of smell. And the crazy thing is, we're still learning about them every day. There's new stuff coming out all the time. Now, dolphins communicate in a multitude of ways. They've got a whistle that's unique to each individual, very similar to humans, and our unique voice. They also have this big sense of family in their pods. As an example, they'll stay with an injured one and help them to breathe. Now, I could have talked to Kathleen for hours, and I feel like we just touched the surface. You catch that one? Anyways, in these intros, I'm always really careful not to give up too much, because I really want it to be a surprise for you. So sit back and get ready for lots of surprises, and when this episode's over, you're going to love Dr. Dudzinski, and maybe, just maybe, you're going to love dolphins just a little bit more. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FURREALPODCAST, covered by most pet insurance.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and games, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real Podcast. Today, I've got a guest that I've been dying to talk to, actually. She's got the job that I think everybody probably out there wants to do. I've got Dr. Kathleen Dudzinski of the Dolphin Communication Project. We're going to say DCP moving forward. But hey, Kathleen, thanks so much for taking the time. And I mean that. As a kid, I have always loved salt water and all that. And you've got kind of like the dream job to me. So welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here, and I'd have to agree with you. I think I have a pretty cool job.
A really cool job. So I did all kinds of research, what I was thinking when I was thinking about what we're going to do today, let's talk about you a little bit, how you got where you are. I was looking at schools. It seems like you're affiliated with 5 to 10 different schools. Your education's amazing, and you've been all over the place. So let's just kind of get how you got where you were. I know you went to University of Connecticut. Are you from Connecticut, or where are you from?
I am. I'm from Connecticut, and contrary to many people out there, I haven't loved dolphins from birth.
Right.
I like you. I loved the oceans. I love animals. And I loved science. I was one of those kids who was a science geek, and I could tell you the names of all of my science teachers from 7th grade through through college, probably. I loved those three topics. I just didn't know how to put it together into a career. And so when I got to the University of Connecticut, so I was in VOAG and FFA in high school, and went in to the University of Connecticut or UConn for biology, and did quite a few different internships or independent studies. I learned pretty quickly that I didn't want to work with plants. No offense to the plant scientists out there. Then after that, learned pretty quickly I was not a fan of microscopes. I liked the naked eye or binoculars. And in the summer before my senior year, I did an internship with a whale watching company out of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and loved every minute of it. Worked from Memorial Day to Labor Day, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And on the whale watching boats, I was a grunt. I helped collect the data, make observations. That year, we had the first recorded observation in decades of a blue whale. We got really close to it.
Wow.
The season was different for humpback whales because their prey wasn't really in abundance. So we saw right whales and sei whales and other kinds of animals. And it was pretty cool. And it was that summer that I realized, hey, I can make a job or a career out of all the things I like: animals, science, the oceans. And so, as we were chatting about earlier, this was before computers. So I spent my senior year doing research in the library and checking things out and reading scientific papers where you had to go get the journal they were in and make photocopies so that you could read them and make comments on them. And then I started writing to different professors and found a new program at Texas A&M University, and met my professor there and was able to start my graduate school program at Texas A&M University. And yes, they do indeed have dolphins in the Gulf of Mexico and along the Texas coast. So I had a lot of questions about that from my family, and I was considered a Yankee visiting Texas and doing my degree there. I spent time in Texas doing my degree, but I also, as most people who do graduate work know, your topic might change. And while my topic, looking at dolphin communication, didn't change, the species that I was going to study and the location I was going to study them in changed 3 times. And I wound up studying Atlantic spotted dolphins in the Bahamas and looking at them from the underwater perspective. With my advisor and my dad, I designed and built what we lovingly call the Mobile Video Acoustic System, or MVA, or array for short, which means I can record animals that are habituated to me underwater and get an idea of what sounds they're making and who's making those sounds for about a third of all my recordings, and then get an idea of what messages they're sending using both vocal messages and behaviors and postures and the like. So that was pretty exciting. I won an award at a conference in 1993 for the array. And then after graduating, I did 2 back-to-back postdocs in Japan off of Mikura Island, because that's another group of animals that are habituated to human swimmers. And so I was able to take the methods I applied in the Bahamas and look at dolphins in Japan and get an idea of how 2 different groups of dolphins in different habitats might be sharing or using similar or different signals. And it turns out there's a lot of conservation in the signals that these animals are using. Along the way, as I was finishing and doing my postdoc and finishing it up, I got to be a part of an IMAX film from McGillivray Freeman Films called Dolphins.
I've seen it.
Yep, it was very exciting. I myself and 6 other scientists were the humans in the film, and there were a lot of dolphins in it. It was pretty cool. Got to share what we know about them. I got to spend what I consider a sabbatical year, 2020 to 2021. 2000 to 2001, visiting 40 different science centers and museums to introduce the film and to meet with kids and ask and answer questions about dolphins and the oceans, and started the Dolphin Communication Project in 2000, and could go into, could chat with you for hours about what we've been doing and how we've been doing it.
By the way, if you ever get stuck in a room with me, you're going to hate it, because I could spend hours asking you questions about it. You're really honest. So real quick question for you. So when you were at A&M, I'm in Austin. So were you down in like Galveston or Corpus, or where were you?
Well, the first year and a half, so the first 4 semesters, including summer, were in College Station, gigantic campus,
Oh, yeah.
which was pretty cool, and spent time in Galveston because the lab was down there. But because the lab was new, the Marine Mammal Research Program was new at Texas A&M. I had my main advisor was down there, Dr. Barrett Versig, and Dr. Jane Packard was my co-chair on my committee. So I would spend time up in her lab, it was ethology, and then down in Galveston. And after the first year and a half, then I was based in Galveston. But for 4 years, I was based 6 months of each of those years in the Bahamas and 6 months in the lab. So
when you were in the Bahamas in the movie, I actually went back and watched it again because I saw it when it first came out. Was that Bimini where you guys were at, or what island was that actually on?
no, we were north of Grand Bahama Island. So
Okay.
my research was based north of Grand Bahama Island, about 40 miles from land. And so we were boat based. We'd go out for 5 to 6 days, depending on the weather. And it was during the summer, so we always had to dodge, potential storms,
Hurricanes.
etc.
Yeah.
So that's where I spent my time. And then for DCP, the research that we did was actually off of Bimini from 2000 forward to 2020. And then that's because we did some filming there with with McGillivray Freeman for the dolphin footage. There had been some preliminary research done by Bimini Undersea looking at the dolphins there, and so we started a research project there with them because it was the film company didn't really want to spend weeks and weeks away from land at sea
Right.
with a giant IMAX camera, which at that point in time was 200 to 300 pounds. So it was, it was like you were moving around a half of a Volkswagen Bug in the water.
Well, wait a minute here. Let's get to that camera because there's somebody that's pretty close to you that's kind of affiliated with that camera, isn't it? Like a husband?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I met my husband on the first film shoot for the Dolphins film. He did some of the shots and also kept the camera running, made sure that everything was going
Yeah.
good with it. He was a part of several other films as well, with McGillivray Freeman and a few other companies. And but they at the time that we did the film, I was living in Japan and was doing my postdoc there. And how I was living my life in Japan from the island and going out, on daily trips, they wanted to depict that, but they didn't want to travel to Japan to do the film.
Mm-hmm.
And the company found a place in Bimini to film sort of the land portion of how I was doing my postdoc, and then the dolphin. They have spotted dolphins off of the Abaco area, so they kind of pulled things together to say this is how you're living your life now, and you would have done this if you could have, when you did your degree. But
Of course.
so it was sort of a conglomerate of a few different things pulled together for that, which was pretty cool.
When you guys were there, and this is a little off subject, so I've spent some time on Abaco in the Marls. Have you ever been in the Marls?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not sure I've been there. I have been to Abaco several times.
Yeah, I was down there fly fishing actually, and there was a woman. God, she was amazing. But it was on Great Abaco, and they have this area where, I went out with a guide, and I was just learning how to fly fish at the time and we were going for bonefish. But they take in this thing, and I always think of the book Islands in the Stream, the Hemingway book,
Mm-hmm.
and you're out there, and there's all these it's all these small little sandbars, but it's all these, you navigate all these things. And the Marls, if you didn't know back then, they probably didn't have the GPS we have now. You'd get lost. I would have died if the boat had done it, because you could never find your way back in. It's all these little, basically water trails all over the place. Absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yep. We went down there with one of the boat captains that I was on. One of the boats that I was on, we went through Abaco and such, and we saw dolphins, which is pretty cool, but we weren't studying them there.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's all of the Bahamas. I mean, there's lots of neat little islands, and there's little inlets, and it's pretty cool. I'm using that word a lot, but it is. There's lots of little islands.
I use cool all the time, by the way.
Yeah, lots of little rocks that you can come up against, and clear water, and animals all around. Yeah. I mean, like you, Mark, I love the water.
Yeah. I always tell people, I grew up in Southern California, and I'm a surfer and all these other things too.
Mhm.
But I always tell people, I've just got to get my saltwater fix. I just need it badly, and I just need to go and just sit in the water. I don't care. So back to just one thing about A&M. So when you were, I always have to do this. I may have told you from the first talk. So the field there, the sports field is actually Kyle Field. Just so everybody else listening, it's not my field, but I want to call it my field anyway.
Yes,
So I
yes.
love that.
Yeah.
So getting back to, you know what? Let's do this because and I want to get into the communication part of it too. But let's kind of educate everybody about dolphins because the difference between dolphins and, let's say, porpoises and all that. Because one of the things when I rewatched the movie that we're talking about, dolphins, it was the one from 2000.
Mhm.
I mean, you forget all these things, but there's four. Is it four? Does the movie say 40? Now, I haven't seen that in some of the research. There's 40 different species that are in the dolphin family, or what's the term? It's a cetacean. Is that how you pronounce it, or cetacean?
Well, there's cetaceans.
Cetacean.
Yep,
Okay,
there's
there.
cetaceans, and those are all the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And
Okay.
so the film is now 24 years old. It's still pretty relevant, pretty accurate.
Okay.
With taxonomy, with the number of different whales and dolphins out there, if you will.
There's the word taxonomy. I've got a new word. Thank you.
Yep. So you have for the cetaceans, you have two. That's an order. So whales, dolphins, and porpoises are in the cetacean order, and then you have the suborders, which are the mysticetes and the odontocetes. So the mysticetes are the baleen whales, the humpback whale, fin whale, minke whale.
Right. Right.
The odontocetes are the toothed whales, and so the baleen whales are filter feeders. They have plates that hang from the roof of their mouth, and they take water in various ways and push the water out and keep the little critters inside, and that's how they feed with the different fish or krill, depending on the species. For the toothed whales, the odontocetes, they have teeth, obviously, and there are different families within the odontocetes. The dolphins are one family, the Delphinidae, and there's 37, 38 species of dolphin
Okay.
in the family, and that depends on whether you're a lumper or a splitter with taxonomy. And there's the Society for Marine Mammalogy has a good website, and it allows you to check on some of the taxonomy details on there.
Cool.
So the stepping back a bit based on your question, the difference between dolphins and porpoises, well, there's a couple of anatomical differences that you could see, and if they're swimming around and you see them, you think, oh, that's a dolphin or that's a porpoise. The dolphins have more of a falcate or curved dorsal fin, the fin on the back, whereas porpoises have more of a triangular dorsal fin, a smaller dorsal fin. Porpoises on average are much smaller than dolphins. They also have less of a pronounced beak on average, or the rostrum, the mouth, even though the skull has the telescoping of the frontal bones, or the maxilla and mandible. Sorry, the teeth. Dolphins have cone-shaped teeth, and they're pointy, whereas porpoises have spade-shaped teeth. There's a few other physiological differences, etc. Also, there's 5 or 6 species of porpoise, and they're mostly in the cooler latitudes, with the exception of the vaquita, which is the Gulf of California harbor porpoise. However, it's on its way out, unfortunately, thanks to being bycaught, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
So both dolphins and porpoises are homodonts. They have one type of tooth in their mouth, whereas we are heterodonts. We have 4 types of teeth in our mouth, so different types. They also only get one set of teeth. And so they'll erupt, and you'll have them, and you can pull a tooth, slice it, and stain it, and get a minimum age on an individual, 1 layer per year.
Right.
Unless you see the year that the animal's born, or see when it's born, and then you can do that. And for the dolphins, they range in size from the Hector's dolphin, which is only found off New Zealand, then several mid-sized dolphins like the bottlenose dolphin, which is found in all oceans and coastally and offshore. That's the one, flipper and SeaWorld that you'll see. And then you have some of the larger ones like pilot whales and false killer whales. They're actually dolphins, even though
Right.
their names have whale in it. And killer whales are the largest dolphin. And so the larger animals probably have a common name that includes whale because of their size in comparison to other dolphins, but they are dolphins.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, it's one of those things, always an awareness things. Orca is in the dolphin family, or a dolphin, right?
Yep. The killer whale, the scientific name is Orcinus orca.
Okay.
And so the common name is killer whale. So I know a lot of people prefer to use orca, but I'm a traditionalist. I use killer whale.
You just know more than us. That's all.
No, no, no. We're always learning. There's always more that we can learn.
Oh, absolutely. That's one of the I always talk to people about doing this podcast is that I have a thirst for knowledge. I really do. And I came up with this term recently because I'm just so curious all the time. And just being able doing the podcast, I get to meet so many people like yourself that are just in these other areas that I'm so curious about. And I constantly learning, which to me is the best thing about the whole thing about doing it. And also meeting cool people too.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're talking about these guys, but I want to go back. I mean, let's talk about what you're doing. Let's talk about communication. I've got so many questions. I'm fascinated by what I've read so far. I mean, it's just so interesting. I mean,
Well, thanks.
and it just the fact that one is that you've created this, the being able to record as well as film these things, and you can slow it down to kind of really understand it. How or try to understand what they're doing.
I can slow it down, but I don't.
Okay.
I slow it down if I want to show somebody something, in a presentation, or
Mhm.
certainly to do our analyses. I go frame by frame. There's 30 frames in a second of video, so there's a lot of frames that we would review and go over.
Right.
And for every hour of data that we collect, there's 20 to 30 hours of analysis time. So collecting the data, being in the field and collecting the data, is probably about 10% of what I do, maybe 15%, depending on the year. But doing the data analysis represents, 75 to 80%. And then there's writing and other stuff that has to be done in there. And in terms of the analyzing the data, looking at the video, getting an idea of what's going on between the animals, that's where the patterns become visible. And then I can go back and look at it more when I'm collecting data, or, redirect what I'm doing when I'm collecting the data. So I look at it as, that 10% or 15% actually allows me to do the really exciting stuff, which is 75% of my time, in terms of doing the data analysis and figuring out what's going on between these animals. And I think I should take a slight tangent and say, with the Dolphin Communication Project, or DCP, we're not trying to communicate with dolphins. We're not trying to have a conversation with them. We're actually looking at how dolphins share information, how they communicate with one another, what kind of signals do they use. And they use gestures and postures and behaviors and vocalizations. And so I'm really interested in looking at how they communicate with one another. Kind of want to be a fly on the wall, or
Sure.
a jellyfish floating by them, to get an idea of how they're communicating with one another, and then to compare that to other social animals to see, are we more similar? Are we more different? What's going on there? And we've had some research come out recently, some papers where we are actually applying methods of data analysis used for chimpanzees and ravens to dolphins. And we're finding that aquatic social animals are similar to terrestrial and avian social animals, especially in how they set up their relationships and manage their interactions within a society.
Well, God, I've got so many questions. My problem is I was thinking about it. Normally I do, probably 3 to 5 hours of research, right? Which is
Mhm.
nothing. I'm thinking you've done a lifetime of it. And I've got 3 or 5 hours, and I've got so many more questions for you that I'm
Sure.
going, oh, this is terrible. So one of the things I read is that the dolphins, they thought up until 2007 that the humans really only had the spindle neurons, which mean, where they were able to actually communicate and do all the different things they do. And I'm probably losing a little bit of where it is, just self-awareness. They know who they are. It's crazy.
Well, I'm not a neuroanatomist,
Okay.
so I don't that's outside my expertise in terms of studying the neuroanatomy of the animals. And understanding the neuroanatomy is important, especially, if that's your area of expertise, and if you wanna look at possibly how things are connected, between centers of the brain and actual behavior and actions. But for me, it's not so much what the anatomy is how they use that brain. And so I would look at studying cognition, not intelligence per se, because that's a human tool
Right.
and that's a human rubric. So if you look at intelligence, you're comparing necessarily to humans because that's how we assess things. But I would look at cognition in terms of what kinds of tools do they have in that toolbox that suggest that they are highly cognitive. And so
Mhm.
self-awareness is one that's been studied through the mirror self-recognition test, but there's also complex play, object play, tool use, variety of vocalizations, referential communication. They do understand that the signature whistle is used to identify and recognize individuals and maintain contact within the group. It's probably the only vocalization that dolphins have that is similar to human language. I don't believe that dolphins have a language like English or Japanese or
Right.
Spanish. Uh,
Dolphin, you mean?
yeah, but they can communicate. And
Right.
and Mark, we're communicating, we're using language right now. But if you were dropped into a country where you did not speak nor understand the language, you still would be able to communicate to find food, to find water, to find shelter, to find a potty. There's language is one form of communication, but it is not the only form of communication. Because we use it to share information over time and space, we tend to rely heavily on it, but there's so many other ways to share information and to communicate.
Well, yeah, that's what I wanted, and because you just said exactly one of the things I read it when you talk about communication, it's really the way you transfer knowledge, right?
Well, I'm not sure it's knowledge. I'd say communication is sharing information between a
Sharing information, yeah, that's what I meant.
between a sender and a receiver,
Right,
and the signal is the vehicle by which they share that information. But when we study communication in other species, we can get a lot of information when we look at the sender, but we still need to know what the context is and we need to know what types of signals are being used.
right,
Because if you're using a vocal signal, then you may be able to understand and identify who the receiver is, but then again, you might not, depending on what the intent of that signal is. And so the sender is sending a message and the receiver is getting the meaning out of that signal. And the message and the meaning are not necessarily the same. And that's where miscommunication or deception can come into play. It's when the message and the meaning match up
right.
that you have, a straightforward bit of communication. And that's with people who understand the same signals. If you're studying another animal species and you're trying to understand what they do, first you got to make observations to get an idea of how do these signals function within that group between individuals. And we're still at the early stages of learning that with dolphins.
Well, one of the things, and you touched about it a little bit ago, is their signature whistle. They all have their own sound, I guess, a whistle?
Well, it's primarily bottlenose dolphins have been studied. There's a few other species recently where some papers have come out suggesting they too might have signature whistles. And the signature whistle is if you plot the call on a graph, you make a recording and you visualize that recording. It's called a spectrogram, and it's frequency versus time.
Sure.
And so the whistles are narrow band signals, which means they have a lot of energy over a very narrow range of frequencies, sometimes called pitch in music. And I can't whistle, so I can't even share that with you. But you can, if you hear a whistle or you do whistle, it would graph as a squiggly line on the spectrogram.
Uh-huh.
And that contour pattern or that squiggly line is what's considered the signature whistle per individual. And yes, we know that dolphins have individually distinct signature whistles. We think that they develop over the first year of life. So they're not born with a specific signature, but they develop that signature within that first year of life. And others will use it to call to individuals. It's been shown to be used to maintain group cohesion. So individuals who are separated visually in space or maybe in time and they come together may whistle to maintain contact between individuals or to indicate to the others, hey, wait up, it's me, it's Bob, I'm coming towards you, something like that. Or, hey, Bob, are you coming this way? So it is a referential signal because it refers to a specific individual.
I'm trying to bite my tongue. I've got so many questions. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
So one of the things you talk about in the Dolphin movie, but then you bring it forward is several things. So one is that one of your theories originally was that dolphins tend to make more whistles, or the sounds that they make. I know they do a bunch of different other things as well. Is generally they do more in murky water versus clear water because they don't make those sounds because they can see each other much better. Did I interpret that right, or is that wrong?
That's an idea, although I don't know that that's been fully examined.
Okay.
One, because we may not be able to see them in murky water, and where I study them, they're in clear water, so I wouldn't actually be able to assess that hypothesis for the data that I have.
Hmm.
However, dolphins also have echolocation.
Right. I want to get into that one.
Yeah, so that's for short range navigation or for finding fish. So the echolocation signal, the fundamental frequency is much higher than whistles. Whistles goes up to about 22 kilohertz. For reference, our hearing, human hearing, can go up to about 20 to 22 kilohertz depending on your age and your sex. So we can hear the whistles, the fundamental, no problem. Because echolocation has a lot of energy over a wide range of frequencies, we can hear the frequencies of the clicks in the low end, but we don't hear the fundamental. That's at about 120 kilohertz, so it's well out of our hearing range. But because it has energy in those low ends, we can hear those bits of it.
Hmm.
So the higher you go in frequency, the shorter distance will those sounds travel. So whistles are thought to go, about a mile, give or take. And clicks are more like 100 or 200 meters, depending on how they're being used and where the energy is in that range of the clicks. And so they're using that for short range navigation, maybe for finding fish, maybe for sharing information with other members of the group as they're swimming along as well. But also, just to jump back to whistles,
Sure.
there's a colleague of mine, Jason Bruck, and he's done some podcasts with DCP. He, for his degree, he looked at long-term social memory in dolphins, and he used signature whistles because it's a signal that dolphins would recognize, and also because dolphins would use that. They would know the signature whistles of other individuals in their group. And long story short, his dissertation was pretty cool. His paper was pretty cool. But what he showed, he was studying dolphins from, I think, 6 different facilities across the U.S. and North America, and showed that dolphins do indeed have long-term social memory. In fact, they can remember signature whistles of animals they haven't seen for 20 or 25 years.
Wow.
So, which is very exciting, which shows that they have, something that we have, long-term social memory,
Right.
which is pretty cool. And then he and another colleague, Vincent Yannick from St. Andrews in the UK, they were able to show that dolphins don't necessarily recognize each other's faces. They can recognize an acoustic cue, which is signature whistles, but that they can recognize urine signatures. So each dolphin has their own urine signature, and that can be matched. So if you're swimming around, it makes sense that you have a signal that you can hear when you're not in visual range.
Sure.
And then if you're in close range, you can recognize or confirm who you're swimming with by, checking out urine chemical.
Well, that's what. Well, I mean, that's how some insects communicate. Or I guess
Yep.
animals are. I guess ants are considered animals as well because they eat.
Yep.
So, because they leave the pheromones and the chemicals, and that's how they find stuff. So,
Hmm.
one of the things I read is that it's assumed, I guess, that dolphins don't smell.
Well, they don't. They don't smell because their nose, their blowhole is the nose. That's migrated from the front of their face to the top of their head as a built-in snorkel.
Uh-huh.
So they have very atrophied olfactory bulbs, lobe, etc. And that's probably used for taste,
Mhm.
because taste and smell are linked. So,
Right,
but they wouldn't, and also the relaxed position of the blowhole is closed
right.
because they're voluntary breathers.
Bringing air in, right.
Yep.
So if they can't smell in the chemical, how it's just
Taste.
okay, taste, okay.
Yep.
So they're tasting urine, huh?
Yep. Well, that's it. We had this behavior that we had seen for years called beak to genital, and it's the rostrum or the beak that up to the genital area of another individual.
Mhm.
And we thought it was maybe a mechanical signal or, using echolocation, etc. And when they confirmed that there was a chemical signature and it's coming from the urine, and that gave that behavior a lot of possible meanings in terms of, hey, we've seen it now with calves when they're over 3.5 months old or over 3 months old. the mom will let other individuals come in and hang out with them, and they're all sampling and tasting and getting to know that animal. No one has tested this that I know of. I would think that the chemical signal is something they're born with, whereas the signature whistle is something they develop. So you have to learn who that individual is, and then as their signature whistle develops, you can match that and pair it off with the chemical signature.
So in some ways, would it be similar to like when a dog is in heat because they've got the pheromones? Do the dolphins have something similar to that as well then?
Yeah, that's been thought to be the case,
Uh-huh.
not just for ID, but for reproductive status.
Sure.
You know, there's
Yeah.
there's a variety of different behaviors and positions and interactions, and I don't see any reason why males wouldn't be, checking out a female to see if she's going to be receptive.
They're mammals.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there it is. So I don't. God, I'm going to talk so much. Let's talk about the click trains and that because we need to get into all the other gestures and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
I'm gonna have you on this thing for 2 days. So let's talk about click trains. Two things, and then you can get into the real thing. So one of the things I because there's different thoughts on the click train too. So they've got one where they do something that's like 200 in like a second, and there's one that goes to 2,000 in a second.
Yeah, the echolocation that's thought for like foraging and hunting and different things like that is probably a couple of hundred or 100 to a couple hundred clicks per second. There's burst pulsed vocalizations, which are click vocalizations, but because they produce clicks in 1,000 or 2,000 clicks in a very short amount of time, and when I say short, I mean a second or microseconds,
Right.
they sound more like an emotional signal. So a squawk.
Angry or happy or something like that?
Well, a squawk or a whine, it sounds,
Mhm.
it's the onomatopoeia. It sounds like what it, you know, the whine sounds like a whine. It sounds like a squawk or such. So it sounds like what it's named. And they are high repetition clicks that are thought to be involved in maybe an emotional content, or to put an exclamation point on, to be anthropomorphic here
Sure.
on their interactions. And so there are some species of dolphin that do not whistle, and so it's thought that they use these other types of click vocalizations for communication and not just for personal foraging use or personal navigational use. So, if you'd asked me 30 years ago, we didn't really know how all of the vocalizations were produced and how they were made. And there's been different ideas over the years. And
Mhm.
the current idea is that the calls from whistles to clicks are on a graded scale. They're not discrete vocalizations, and they're produced sort of behind and below the blowhole, which underneath that there's a dorsal bursae structure, kind of ribbed structure, and they have a single blowhole through which they breathe. But in the skull, they have the two openings, the two nares, and the right side has become four sets of air sacs that they pass air back and forth, and therefore I produce those calls just behind and below the blowhole, and then the sounds are sort of focused out through the melon, which is the forehead, and then the melon is a soft tissue that sits right on the forehead, on the front of the skull of the dolphins, and the melon has a density that's similar to seawater. It's called acoustic fat. And so when the signals are projected out, there's no bending on them. When you have a pencil and you put it in a half filled glass of water, it looks bent because
Sure.
air and water have different densities. And then dolphins receive sounds through their lower jaw, and that lower jaw is hollow, and it is also filled with acoustic fat. And it's more tapered and narrow at the front, and then fans out and is wider at the back, meaning posterior towards where the internal, middle and inner ears would be. And so that shape of the skull, and then when you put muscle and tissue and everything on it, gives them the classic smile.
Right.
So they have that smile now, so that they can hear.
And so that's kind of like a sound chamber a little bit.
Well, I don't know if I would say a sound chamber, but it's definitely how they receive the sounds. And then the lower jaw will act sort of like our pinna will do.
You're definitely the professor, and I'm definitely the student here.
Fun conversation.
I love talking about this stuff. So, God, it drives me crazy. I got so many questions for you. So, one of the theories I read, and I think when we first talked about this a while back ago, again, theory, when they're doing, so when I think about sonar, I mean, for everybody that's listening out there, if you think about a sonar in a submarine, it's sending pulses to basically see what's ahead of them and all that kind of stuff. So,
Mhm.
so the echolocation is doing something similar to that.
It's very similar. Yep.
And so when they're doing that, I know one of the theories was that maybe when they send that sonar out, it comes back and it could be, for lack of, the student talking here,
Mhm.
saying a 3D image of what's ahead of them or whatever. I know that one of the things I read in echolocation is a lot of the fish they get are actually in the sand. They can't figure out how they find them, but they think it's through the echolocation. They do the vibration, they can find it's there.
Actually, there's a couple of other possibilities now too that have just recently come up. So
Okay, cool.
there's a couple different things. One, we don't know how dolphins perceive their echoes that they receive back.
Right,
So the whole idea with sonar and echolocation is a signal is produced, and then anything it encounters will send a reflection or an echo back. So that's echolocation.
right,
And so it's like taking a stone and you have a flat pond that has a tree and a rock and something else in it, and you throw the rock and it sends out those ripples, and then the ripples encounter the stone and the tree and they send echoes back. That's basically the visual concept for echolocation. But we don't know how dolphins perceive nor how they neurologically process those echoes. And they're doing it really fast because they don't send out the next click until they've received the echo. So we're talking microseconds here for
uh-huh,
the processing and the stuff. We look at, X-ray machines, not really X-ray machines, but ultrasound machines would be
right,
the better term. And that gives us a visual representation because we're visual people. So
right.
this is how we get it, or visual animals, and we get it. So I that's a caution of, we don't know how they perceive it, but we do know through cross-modal studies that if they see an odd shaped PVC object with their eyes, they can pick out that same object with their echolocation. Don't know how they're doing it, but we know they're doing it. It's, the neural processing.
Their eyes actually reading it, but the echolocation's reading it the same way as their eye is, sort of.
Yes. Yeah. Those are some cross-modal studies that Lou Herman and his colleagues did at the Koala Basin Marine Mammal Lab a decade or so, 2 decades ago. And so they showed that they can match and see that. It's kind of like the same cross-modal match between the signature whistle and the urine. That's how they confirmed that was going. It's like if you take your hand and you put it in a box and you have other things in there, you'd be able to tell the difference between marbles and a tennis ball. And that's your sense of touch, and then you visually know what those things look like. So you have the different things there. So with echolocation, they are using it to find fish. Well, I had some colleagues in Sweden who put together this system called Elvis, which is a echolocation visualization integration system. I think I may be wrong on that acronym, but I think that's what it is. And it was basically a mat with 16 or 24 hydrophones, spaced in a grid, in a square grid.
Mhm.
And they would hang it in the facility. This is at Colmarden Deer Park, and the dolphins echolocate on it, and it would light certain things up, and they could do different things and see how the echolocation was processing in its search patterns. Well, then they came and joined us in the Bahamas when we were at Dolphin Encounters, and we buried the mat and then put some targets on top of the mat to see how their echolocation would work. Interestingly, the coral sand reflected the echolocation, so they couldn't find the targets. And so the type of substrate that you have might actually reflect back so that the echolocation doesn't penetrate.
Huh.
Well, this was pretty surprising because off of Bimini, we got bottlenose dolphins who echolocate and do this thing called crater feeding, and they're finding little sand dabs or gobies in the sand, and we thought, finding them through echolocation, getting them, and then going vertical, finding out where they are at the sand, going vertical in the water column, and then burying themselves like up to their eyeballs and getting the fish and coming out. And it's called crater feeding because when they come away,
There's a crater.
yeah, there's these craters. Well, there was a paper that just came out in 2003, the end of last year, in the Journal of Experimental Biology, that shows that bottlenose dolphins, might have some passive electroreception, meaning they might be able to tell the difference between, AC and DC fields,
Wow.
which this is what I love about science is
Yeah.
you have these observations that don't make any sense, and then you ask other questions, you collaborate with people in different disciplines, and it's like, okay, well, maybe the dolphins are swimming and echolocating horizontally above the sand, and maybe also using a little bit of this very small scale passive electroreception to identify where the fish are, and then using something else, tactile sense or taste sense, to get those fish in the sand. So
Sure.
yeah, very cool stuff.
That's totally cool. Hey, one thing I want to add in for people listening too is the dolphin's visual, because each eye works independently.
Hmm.
Correct me anytime I say something wrong. So they can go, and they're on the side of there, so they can go forward and backwards independently.
Yep.
But their vision is really good. One of the things I read too is that when they're underwater, they can see nearsighted because they're in the water. But when they actually jump out of the water, their eye adapts to be able to see better above the water.
Well, they have a split pupil, which means they have good visual acuity underwater and above water. Of course, as we all know, those of us who spend time underwater,
Sure.
your sight is limited by the underwater visibility. So, off the Florida coast here, you have some days where the visibility is not all that great, especially when you're, in the coastal area, and you have some wave action that kicks up some of the silt. So you might not be able to see very well in that instance. But then, yes, when they leap, and some dolphins will sight and look for birds during leaping to
Oh.
give an indication of, like, dusky dolphins in Argentina will sight for flocks of birds to see where maybe fish are, etc. If they're foraging, so they do have really good adaptations. They can see well above and below the water depending on visibility. They have a split pupil that gives them that visual acuity, and they actually have the musculature that they can pooch out their eye. And so each eye on each side gives them about 180-degree field of view.
So wait a minute. So it's kind of like a telescope, sort of?
No, no, not really like a telescope, just, sort of like it's a little eye, the eye pooches out and gives them more range, more
Wow.
that fish eye. The only place that they have binocular vision is like just below the chin, just below, like both eyes would be pointing down, and that's where they would be able to see with binocular vision like we do.
Mhm.
I mean,
Wow.
I know that my sisters as moms would have loved to have been able to have each eye see differently, and sometimes I think they did.
My mom did.
Yeah.
I'm telling you now. My mom had to have a look. She always said she had an eye in the back of her head. So my mom did for sure.
Mhm, mhm. Yep.
Okay, so we're just using so much time. Let's talk about the tactile way they communicate as well, because we haven't even really touched upon that, and go into that a little bit.
Well, they're very tactile. I think part of that is they have a very very sensitive skin, very sensitive to touch. And if you think about it, in if you've been in the water and you're moving around, you don't always have to touch someone to know that they're moving next to you. I mean,
Right.
certainly you can, but you feel things more through the water, etc. But dolphins are very tactile, and they'll share contact with their pectoral fins or their flippers, and that has certain meanings depending on where in the body they contact and who is contacting, whether the body is contacting somebody's pec fin, or the pec fin is contacting another dolphin's body, or it's pec fin to pec fin. Their body to body contact, so there's rubbing on one another, there's a lot of affiliative contact. There can be more agonistic contact. They can kick with their tails. The power stroke is up. They can ram with their rostrum, or bite, or hit, or jaw clap. That's not really a tactile contact. It's more of a vocal,
Right.
non vocal acoustic cue. But there's a lots of different contact, and the way kin share contact, it can be different to the way non-kin share contact. So a lot of non-kin share, especially young males, and this is both the dolphins we've studied in managed care as or captive dolphins, as well as in the wild. They share these behaviors exactly the same way, and there's the young males will share more pec fin contact as they're establishing and then strengthening and maintaining their friendships that, if for some species, will last a lifetime. And there's a variety of different other kinds of behavior. Young females don't really share that much pec fin contact, and then as they're adults and they're in the same potentially reproductive status, they'll share more contact. For example, pregnant females with pregnant females, lactating females with lactating females, and the like. These are behaviors that the individuals within, each pair is sharing contact and they're sharing information, but then other individuals that may be watching may understand, oh, they have a tight bond. Okay, they're using that contact that way. At least we can observe that from the hours of observation that we've had as well.
Well, so I know that they, groups like a pod, and one of the things I read they can be as big as 12, but sometimes there's two pods may get together at some point, but there's 12. So do they like when you're studying them and you're getting to know the individuals because they're in that same family or pod of their. I know one of the things they can travel like 50 miles in a day and you find them, but do they always stay kind of in the same area and I think I read, and again, I know I'm going to be wrong on some of the stuff, is that the pod can be a little bit of fluid, like one may leave and another one may come in. And I mean,
Yeah, well, it really depends on the species you're talking about. Not all dolphins migrate. There are some that are residential to a particular area, especially coastal areas.
mm,
Some dolphins are found more offshore and found in schools of 1,000 or more.
okay,
Some that are more coastal are found in those smaller groups, and they may not distribute or migrate. Uh, and the killer whale is the largest dolphin. It's found in matriarchal societies, so the offspring will stay with mom for life until maybe that mom dies, and then her daughters will separate out into other family groups, being very, very general here. For the smaller oceanic dolphins, the ones that we've studied, and most smaller dolphins live in what's called a fission fusion society, and that's where and it's very similar to primates or humans and some other species, where
right,
you have smaller groups that might be resting, traveling, playing, and they'll come together, say, to forage or to socialize for a bit of time, and then they'll separate out into smaller groups that may have the same membership or may have different membership, and that's the fission fusion society characteristic. And dolphins, bonobos, which is the pygmy chimpanzee,
sure,
and dolphins are the only species we know of that use sex outside of reproductive purposes. So to strengthen social bonds or to use them to manage relationships, in their society. So
that's interesting.
it for dolphins, when we're chatting with older audiences, which I'm hoping some of these are, it's pretty much anybody, any place, anytime, anywhere. So for that, for both males and females.
So I can go on and on and on and on about this stuff. So one of the things in my thought process when I was thinking about this is because when you read about how they're communicating by touching with their pectoral fin or whatever, it reminds me of one is body language, right? I mean, most people as humans, we're just thinking and talking, but they're 75% of our communication is not talking. It's all the other actions that we do.
Hmm.
So I was thinking, I'm, in being more cognizant of what we're talking about, thinking about body language to them so they can tell that. And then I thought about, how you're sitting next to somebody and you're not feeling good and somebody will just pat you on your leg. It's kind of what they're doing. Like it's okay. All they do is pat. You know exactly what they're doing. It's really similar.
Yeah, in some cases it is. Pec fin contact can be used that way.
Yeah.
We also, when I was looking at the interactions, I would know when I was watching a group of young animals that it was play and that it wasn't a fight, it wasn't aggression,
Right.
even though it was agonistic, and there was a lot of the same actions, the biting and the jaw claps and the chases. You'd see those in play, you'd see those in aggression, and if they were fighting. And so I started to try to figure out what were the modifying cues. Well, play is also characterized by oblique angles of approach or approaching from the back, soft angles. And there's a lot of affiliative rubbing, a lot of body to body contact that's not agonistic, that's not harsh. Whereas you look at dolphins that might be fighting, it's perpendicular angles of approach or head to head angles of approach. None of that affiliative contact between individuals. It's all either slaps or bites or hits or kicks.
Mhm.
And so when you start seeing that, and if you have seen dogs playing, gosh, if you've seen kids, I
Mm.
mean, you've seen it with your kids, and I've seen it with my sisters and my nieces and nephews, where if you're wrestling and it gets a little out of control, you can see how the signals might change. And if you're just watching, dogs or cats play, you can see when it's play and then when it starts to change. You can see some of that context and some of those other modifying cues change. And it's the same with dolphins, same with other social animals.
Well, what I'd love about in the dolphins too, they just look like they like to play. I mean, all this stuff, they look like they're playing all the time. And I know that they're not playing all the time. I mean, but they just seem like they're playing.
Well, part of that is the smile. They have that smile no matter what they're doing.
Yeah.
So
It's a play. But it's interesting. I mean, it's funny. I mean, you've been doing this forever, but when you take a step back and you kind of think about what they're doing, when you were talking about the way they communicate by, just by their gestures and things like that, then you take it and you look at it as a human. We do the same thing. We're just not paying attention to it half the time.
Well, it's become so second nature for us to assess it that it's not a,
Right.
we don't even think about it that we do it. When you step back and you start thinking about some of the stuff. I mean, if you think about, for people, if you see two people grab hands,
Right.
there's a lot of possible reasons.
Right.
But then if I give you more information and I say, well, they're in a park or they're on the sidewalk of a busy street, those are two very different contexts.
Sure.
And then if I tell you, if it's a father and a child, and I tell you it's the child that grabs the father's hand, not the other way around, well, then you limit your possible functions by half, because if the child is grabbing the father's hand, then the father's not disciplining the child.
Right.
You've got something else going on.
Yeah.
So when you study non-human animals and you want to understand how they're communicating with each other and what they're sharing, that's what you do. You have to start identifying, okay, what's the context and what's going on? But even more, who's the initiator?
Right.
And who's receiving it? And this circles back to the beginning when I said, when you're looking at tactile or postural or behavioral signals, you know who the sender is, and pretty much you know who the receiver is because they're right there in close proximity.
Right.
When you look at vocalizations, it's much harder to identify who's the intended recipient here. And that gives you more information about what those signals might be.
This is the reason why you're the professor and I'm the student.
It's fun. It's called making observations, right? We can all do that.
Yeah, we do. But you just think at a broader spectrum. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I personally think that all people are born as scientists because everybody's inquisitive.
Right.
I'm sure with your kids, they asked the why question. They want to know why, and they want to know how things work, etc. And it's only as they age and develop, as they go to school, that some folks retain the scientific approach and keep going with that. And those are the ones that become scientists. And the others just veer in a different way and ask their questions somewhat differently.
Yeah, I definitely have the why all the time, but clearly, but not at the depth that you do, which is, thank God we have people like you to figure this stuff out because it's just so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah.
One last thing on there, because I know, I promised you an hour. We're going to go over an hour. I can tell right now. But one of the things I read too, again, this is just on dolphins specifically, or I guess probably in the ones we're talking about, the bottleneck. But one of the things they do too is if one's injured or ill, their friend or family or whatever will stay with them to make sure they're okay. And if they need oxygen, they'll actually push them up to the surface so they can get it. They take care of them, which I think is just really cool too.
Well, yeah, there's been cases reported of dolphins providing what's called epimuletic or succorant care. There are two different kinds of care that's provided, and that's definitely been out there that they'll care for one another. They're very gregarious, and oftentimes when you have a mass stranding, you have one animal that might be ill, might be injured or ill. And the best thing, unfortunately, if you can find that individual, would be to euthanize it. And then you have a chance of saving all of the other individuals because they won't leave. They will stay with the individuals.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's also been observations of people being saved by dolphins.
Oh, from sharks. Yeah.
Yeah. From Aristotle's time forward. Unfortunately, I think those are biased samples because we don't know. We've never heard from the people that the dolphins haven't saved, whether they, had information or not, about that. But it's not, I wouldn't necessarily, and, because we've had people say, oh, the dolphins saved me from sharks and, this and that. There's numerous observations of some of that. Okay, but I don't think I would jump off a boat and think that the dolphins would save me and put myself, think they'd be out there and they'd say, oh, that person needs help. We'll go save them.
I guarantee you that's a fact right
Mhm.
there.
Yep.
Okay, so again, we're running out of time.
Mhm.
If you wanted to add some last points for everybody listening out there, you and I could talk the rest of the day. But I don't know if everybody wants to hear what we got to say. But
Yeah, yeah.
what would you leave us with, and then we'll finish this thing up.
Well, I know that you're probably I guess that there's session notes, etc., and you'll have the DCP website there, and I encourage people to check out our webinars. We have more than 75 free webinars, and we have I don't know, numerous podcasts on the Dolphin Pod for people to learn more about dolphins, etc. I thank you for having me, and I think for me, I think dolphins are a pretty cool social animal, and there's so much more we can learn about them. And I look at them as a different type of social animal, but still very similar to all the other social animals out there. It's just they're adapted to not only survive but thrive in the environment that they're in. And I can only visit the ocean. I can only visit when I go down, and it would be so cool to be able to spend time, to be able to breathe, and hold not breathe underwater, but hold my breath and spend time under there. I think that would be really cool.
Well, that was a question I wanted for you actually, because I'm watching. How long can you hold your breath? Because you're down there a long time on some of the stuff I've seen you in. I mean, you're down there for a while.
I don't time myself because I'm afraid if I time myself, I'd be thinking more about breathing than I would about the animals. So I just hold until I'm like, okay, I got to go to the surface now. So
Yeah.
I've had different now, depending because I'm not there all the time. I'm in the field about 8 to 10 weeks a year now, and it's probably I don't know. I at one point I guess it was between a minute and 2 minutes, but I'm swimming hard and doing stuff, so I don't know if it's there now or not, and I haven't really paid that much attention.
So the reason why aren't you using air for that?
Scuba.
Yeah.
Because my legs are the propulsion system for the MVA,
Uh-huh.
and it's not. It's just slightly negatively buoyant, so I don't have to fight to keep it underwater. But the dolphins have to come to the surface to breathe.
Yeah, but they can last what, 5 or 6 minutes or something like that, right? Or something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But though, on average, it might be a minute or two as they're swimming and socializing, and I can hold my breath, go down, and check them out, and come back up, and the same as they do. And I'm where I'm collecting the data. It's usually 20 to 30 feet deep, and so it's not too bad.
Yeah, well, it's better than I can do. And that one where I don't know what video or if it was even, by the way, for you guys listening, if you haven't seen the 2000 movie for the IMAX thing, the Dolphins, go back and see it. It's really great. One of the deals I don't know if it was one of your videos or was in that where you had the propulsion thing where you were actually dancing with the dolphins at the same time, and they interacted even more when you were able to do that. It was cool.
Yeah, I got to use a scooter. It was a blast.
Scooter, yeah,
Yeah, it was a
yeah.
blast.
It was so cool because they were doing that. You guys were like almost doing a synchronized swimming. It was pretty cool.
It was a blast.
Okay, so let me do the last thing, and we'll get you off this thing because I'm gonna. And we may have to do a part 2 on this thing, but anyways.
Okay.
So every episode, as everybody knows, I know everybody's already cringing out there. I've got my silly animal joke that I do. Again, for you guys, please send a new one because you know that I don't have very good ones. So here's my dolphin joke for today. How do you make a dolphin laugh? You have any idea, Kathleen?
Huh. No, you actually have me stumped. I'm not sure.
Ah, well, you tell a whale of a joke.
Okay.
Okay, now you know what I mean.
Corny, yep.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So everybody that's out there listening, please, send me your jokes because I'll record it. If you guys want your kids to be on here telling a joke, that would be great. Send it to me at mkyle@thefurrealpodcast.com. Also, if you've got suggestions for the show, I mean, obviously we want great ones like Kathleen just gave us now, but if you got ideas, please reach out to me and I'll get back to you. Kathleen, thanks so much for being on here. God, like I said, I could have done this for hours and hours and hours, but thanks so much.
Yeah, if you know what, if we want to revisit it at some point, let me know. I'm happy to chat with you more.
Well, I can already think what I'm going to ask you the second time.
Sounds good.
Anyways, for everybody listening, as always, thanks so much. Pass the word out there. We can use more listeners all the time. But more importantly, I just appreciate you very much, for real.
For real, 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 for real.
We're supported by Let's Walk, that's here to love your animals like our own.
Austin, Houston, and Denver. Let's Walk is here to love your animals like our own. From daily walks, play, in-house sleepovers, and more. Go to work, out on the town, or take a vacation knowing your pets are in the best hands. This woman-owned small business does it all. Check us out on Instagram at Let's Walk Austin, Houston, and Denver.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.